The music had already started when I walked into the ballroom. I wasn't late. I just wasn't expected. At least not by anyone who thought I still mattered. I stood near the back wall close enough to see the soft blush florals, the crystal stemware, the $1,000 cake tiers. It was a beautiful wedding. Perfect even. Except for the fact that they had erased the woman who built the foundation it stood on. They gave me no name card, no official seat. Just a folded napkin at the edge of a table near the restrooms. Table 19. No one made eye contact when I sat down. I wasn't part of their story anymore. I was the chapter they pretended never happened. If you've ever been quietly removed from a life you helped build, subscribe to Revenge with Seren. Some stories are not loud, they're just finally told. I could hear Samantha's laugh carry across the room. She was glowing, confident, draped in silk and diamonds that weren't hers 3 years ago. I recognized the necklace. Michael had bought it for our 10th anniversary. I wasn't bitter, just observant. Michael stood beside her, his hand resting at the small of her back like it belonged there. Like I hadn't once been the woman he did that with at our wedding in this very hotel. They called Samantha elegant now, a fresh start. I heard one of the bridesmaids say it while fixing her lip gloss at the mirror. Much better match for the family, she whispered. I smiled to myself. I didn't come here to compete. I came here because they didn't think I would. They say time heals. What they don't say is that it also reveals. Especially when you've been forgotten by the people you once sacrificed everything for. Ethan is not my biological son, but I raised him from 12 to 21. I taught him how to shake a hand, how to open a Roth IRA, how to deal with failure even when his real mother flaked out on graduation. He used to call me his real mom. He wrote it in a birthday card once in shaky teenage handwriting I still have in a drawer. But the moment Michael remarried, the story was rewritten. Samantha became the mother of the groom, and I became a question people politely avoided. 2 weeks before the wedding, I overheard something. Michael had left a call on speaker while he made coffee. I wasn't meant to hear it, but I did. We're keeping it small, Samantha's voice said smoothly. Just immediate family and people who won't make it weird. Michael didn't defend me. Not once. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just uninvited, I was inconvenient. So I RSVP'd through someone they didn't expect, Elliot Langford, the groom's godfather. Michael's old mentor. And quietly, my new ally. A week earlier, Elliot had sent a message. You deserve to be there, and by the end of the night, they'll know exactly why. Table 19 wobbled. My napkin had a faint lipstick stain from a previous guest. Someone had scribbled Valerie Hale on a spare tag and taped it to the back of the chair. No title, no relation, just a placeholder. I watched the room fill with relatives I hadn't seen in years, most pretending not to recognize me. I didn't blame them. Loyalty follows convenience. I kept my hands folded. I didn't sip the champagne. I didn't wave at the aunt who once borrowed my car for 2 months without returning it with gas. I didn't look at Ethan, though my eyes wanted to. When he walked down the aisle flanked by groomsmen and admiration, he looked like the man I always knew he'd become. Focused, polished, nervous around the eyes. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and didn't stop looking fast enough. But I saw him. And that was enough. Samantha's vows were scripted but sweet. Michael dabbed at his eyes like a proud father. The kind of emotion he never showed when Ethan won his full scholarship. Back then, I was the one clapping the loudest. The officiant declared them husband and wife. Guests clapped. Rose petals fluttered in slow motion. Somewhere in the front, someone shouted, finally. And I stayed seated at the edge, unimportant. But I knew something they didn't. Elliot Langford would be giving a toast later. And in that speech, he wouldn't be talking about Samantha, or Michael, or any of the perfectly postured people in the front row. He would be talking about me. Because 6 months ago, Elliot and I quietly co-founded a strategic impact fund for small cities, a fund that happened to be the largest investor in Ethan's new real estate venture. I didn't want credit. I just wanted the truth to land gently like petals exactly where it belonged. Have you ever watched someone take your place in the life you built while everyone applauded? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes you don't need revenge. You just need to be remembered. They placed me near the kitchen. Not out of oversight, out of intention. Table 19 wedged between the staff hallway and the swinging door that led to the back prep area. From where I sat, I could see steam rising from silver trays, the rhythm of chefs plating courses and servers balancing glasses of champagne I wasn't offered. My seat wobbled slightly every time someone walked by too fast. The linen was creased and stained faintly with lipstick that wasn't mine. I folded my hands over the napkin and reminded myself I chose to be here. I didn't come for comfort or acknowledgement. I came to witness. Across the room, guests raised glasses in polished rehearsals of joy. Laughter rose in soft waves. The bride's mother waved dramatically to someone at another table. Samantha stood center stage, now draped in white lace and legacy. She did not build her voice high and glittering as she thanked everyone for coming. Michael looked proud, like a man who had finally aligned his life with what he thought he deserved. I watched him smile with the ease of someone who had rewritten history and truly believed it. When the seating chart was printed, my name was not on it. I wasn't on the original guest list. I knew that because 3 weeks earlier, I'd seen a copy of the RSVP tracker. Elliot had shown me without comment, just a glance, while we discussed fund allocations in his office. My name had been added in pen off to the side under a column labeled discretionary. I had once signed the paperwork that secured the original land development contract for Ethan's company. Now, I sat behind a column next to a family friend's teenage son who spent the entire appetizer course scrolling through TikTok. And that was fine. Because I knew what was coming. I knew who would be holding the microphone during the final toast. Elliot Langford, Michael's mentor, Ethan's godfather, and the chairman of the strategic fund that now bankrolled Ethan's business, had invited me for one reason, because he said, "Sometimes, Valerie, the most powerful thing you can do is stand quietly in a room that hoped you wouldn't come." I hadn't answered. I had only nodded. The last time Michael and I stood in the same room was 2 years ago in a downtown office overlooking the bay. He had just remarried. I had just finalized my stake buyout in the consulting firm we built together. "Let's make this clean," he'd said. No need to complicate the future with old names and signatures. I had agreed, but not for the reasons he thought. I was tired of holding walls up for men who only wanted to be seen holding the blueprint. What he didn't know was that I used that settlement, small by most standards, to create something much larger. My own advisory firm, my own reputation, my own capital, silent but precise, woven into places none of them would ever think to look. Ethan didn't look at me once during dinner. Whether that was avoidance or unawareness, I couldn't say. But I watched him. He still touched his cufflinks when he was nervous. Still tilted his head when he listened, just like when he was 13, and unsure how to ask questions without sounding wrong. I had once stayed up with him until 2 a.m. to help him write an essay on resilience. I found the draft in a box of my old papers last month. He had signed the bottom, "Thanks, Val. You're who I want to be." The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as staff began clearing plates. Dessert carts lined up at the edges of the room. A soft chime rang out, and Elliot rose from his seat. He lifted his glass gently without tapping. "May I have your attention for just a moment?" he said, voice calm but commanding. The crowd hushed, forks paused midair. Tonight, we celebrate two wonderful people and the start of something beautiful. I've known Ethan since he was a boy, and I've watched him grow into a young man with remarkable vision and grit. But what many of you may not know, he continued, scanning the room, is that the foundation for this journey, this company, this future, was quietly laid years ago by someone not listed in your programs. There was a brief collective inhale. Michael's smile twitched. Samantha blinked once. Elliot continued. She is not seated at the front. She is not wearing a corsage. She isn't a headline, but if you know the numbers, if you know the partnerships, if you've seen the blueprints, then you've seen her work. He turned his gaze toward me. Calm, unblinking. To Valerie Hale, he said, the architect behind the success you are all here to celebrate. It was quiet at first. No one clapped. They turned, heads twisted in surprise. Eyes scanned toward the back corner where I sat still, my hands resting lightly on my lap. Then just one movement, the groom's father stood. He didn't raise a glass. He didn't smile. He just turned toward me and bowed his head slow and full. There was no music, no dramatic gasp. Just a room full of people suddenly realizing they had missed something important. And I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't nod. I just let the silence hold. Have you ever sat at the edge of a celebration, knowing the whole room forgot who made it possible? Share your story in the comments. Because some people only remember you after they've already used everything you gave. I stayed seated, even after Elliot's toast, even after the groom's father bowed. The moment passed like a sudden breeze felt by everyone, acknowledged by few, and quickly swept under the next wave of orchestrated celebration. No one asked me to move, but I noticed how the energy shifted. One guest stood to get a closer look at me, then pretended to fix her shawl. Another leaned in toward her husband, lips barely moving, eyes darting in my direction. But no one approached. The music resumed, a slow jazz instrumental looping beneath the soft chatter of dessert. Staff carried in tall white cake stands adorned with sugared orchids and gold-dusted strawberries. Someone announced the cake cutting. I didn't stand. I had no need to prove I belonged. Michael didn't look at me. Not once. He stood beside his son, posed for photos, with the bride wiped a smudge from his cufflink, as he always did when nervous, and laughed just a little too loud. That was always his trick laugh, big enough, and no one looks at the cracks. I watched Ethan cut the cake. Steady hands, polite smile, arm wrapped around his new wife's waist. She whispered something into his ear, and he nodded without really reacting. It hit me then, he hadn't known. About the toast. About Elliot's plan. About me being there at all. That explained the stiffness in his shoulders after the speech, the subtle way his grip tightened on the knife handle. I knew that look. It was the same expression he had when he discovered his college roommate had taken credit for his group project. He didn't fight. He withdrew, internalized it, tried to turn it into logic. He didn't understand betrayal in public. Not yet. The bride looked radiant, but her smile faltered as her eyes found mine. I didn't blame her. She had walked into a family built on curated versions of the past. To her, I was an unfamiliar name buried in foundation paperwork and corporate email threads. Michael had likely painted me as distant, maybe difficult, someone who helped in the early days. But that's not what Elliot had said. Elliot had called me the architect. It was a word that settled into the room like dust in sunlight, quiet, undeniable everywhere. I stood briefly when they served cake, mostly to stretch my legs. The walk to the coffee station gave me time to observe. I passed table 7 where Michael's cousin gave me a polite, confused nod. Table 3 held Samantha's closest friends, all too polished to stare, but clearly aware. And near the entrance, seated beside the last row of reserved signs, was an older woman with silver hair in a forest green dress, Elliot's wife, Marion. She stood as I passed. "Valerie," she said, not loudly, but not shyly either. I stopped. "Marion." I just wanted to say, she continued, resting a hand gently on my forearm, "that it's good to see you. Elliot never stopped admiring you, and neither did I." I smiled softly, unsure how to respond. Gratitude, grief, relief. Before I could answer, she added, "You always did the work. Some people just wore the credit better." And with that, she stepped aside, letting me pass. I returned to my seat with coffee in hand and an unexpected stillness in my chest. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just peace. A quiet confirmation that I had been seen, not loudly, not by many, but by someone who mattered. The music swelled as the first dance began. Ethan and his bride twirled under fairy lights, their smiles wide, their youth glowing. I watched the way she leaned into him, completely unaware of the fault lines beneath the floorboards. Not malicious, just innocent. Michael cut in for the father-son moment. They embraced briefly. Then the band shifted to something upbeat, and guests were invited to join. Samantha clapped her hands and grabbed 2 champagne flutes. I watched as she scanned the room for me, then looked away. She wouldn't approach. Not tonight. I didn't expect her to. She had built her entire narrative on the idea that I was replaceable, irrelevant, a footnote in her husband's past. It was easier for her to believe that than to acknowledge what Elliot had said. I stayed until the song ended, until the couple disappeared into a crowd of dancers and the DJ announced the final hour. I stood, collected my coat, and made my way toward the exit without drawing attention. But near the doors, I heard footsteps behind me. "Val." I turned slowly. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes clouded with something that looked like disbelief. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "No," I said, "I didn't." He hesitated. "You knew about the toast," I nodded. Why I let the question hang? There were too many answers. Because I wanted him to know the truth. Because I didn't want him to start his marriage on a lie. Because sometimes being seen without explanation is the only way to reclaim what was erased. But all I said was, because I thought you deserved to know who built your first foundation. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then quietly, he said, "Thank you. For that. For everything." I nodded, turned, and walked out into the night air. The air was cool, the sky clear. My car waited at the far end of the lot. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just drove away, steady hands on the wheel headlights casting long shadows on the empty road ahead. The morning after the wedding arrived soft and slow. Pale sunlight filtered through gauze curtains like it was afraid to disturb me. But I was already awake. Not because of regret. Not because of anticipation. Just stillness, the kind that comes after something seismic has shifted, even if the ground beneath you hasn't cracked. I hadn't heard from anyone. No texts, no calls. Not from Michael, not from Ethan. Certainly not from Samantha. But silence, I had learned, wasn't always absence. Sometimes it was residue. Proof that something had landed hard enough to leave people speechless. You don't watch the groom's father bow to a woman exiled from the seating chart and expect the night to pass without consequences. I poured my coffee black and stood at the window of the hotel suite, watching a groundskeeper stack white folding chairs into neat rows. The wedding arch was gone. A few scraps of eucalyptus tumbled across the grass like forgotten confetti. The kind no one bothers to clean up once the photos are taken. Then my phone lit up. Blocked number. Voicemail. I didn't hesitate. I didn't hope. I waited until the message finished and pressed play with the corner of my thumb. Valerie, hi. It's Samantha. Her voice was too even, too calm, like a blade sheathed in velvet. I found your name. In the vendor documents. The floral contract. The venue lease. The logistics timeline. I didn't expect that. I'm not angry. Her voice caught, but not on emotion, on confusion, on pride. A pause, then a shift. Was this your message? Was that why you came to make me feel small on my wedding day? Then muffled in the background, Michael's voice. You're calling her click. No goodbye, no apology, just an echo of the same old story. How dare you be relevant when I didn't authorize it, I didn't respond. I didn't need to. 3 months ago, when their original wedding planner had ghosted them mid-contract, Michael had called Elliot in quiet panic. Elliot had called me. Just logistics, I had told him. Vendor gaps, timeline cleanup. I don't need credit. Elliot had paused. Are you sure one condition, I'd said? No name card, no title, just fine print. And that's exactly where I placed myself. Behind the scenes, in the contract clauses, the signature lines, the emergency contact numbers. I confirmed the tent permits when the city threatened a delay. I rewrote the run of show. I rescheduled the florist when her delivery truck broke down on the interstate. I even secured the backup generator after a storm warning. The wedding happened because I made sure it would. Not for Samantha. Not for Michael. For Ethan. Because when you raise someone through scraped knees, rejection letters, and dorm move-ins, you don't disappear just because someone else wears the corsage. But I hadn't expected Samantha to find my name. Not yet. I deleted the voicemail. Not out of revenge, but because it no longer needed space in my phone or in my chest. The wedding was over. The spotlight had dimmed. And like most illusions, once it ended, the audience had to sit with what was real. I packed slowly, folded the soft blue dress I had worn, still holding the warmth of the evening. I tucked Ethan's handwritten note into the side pouch of my carry-on. Then I drove not to the airport, but north. There was a town I hadn't visited in years. A place that still held pieces of me before the erasure began. The drive took 3 hours. Winding roads, early turning leaves, sky stretching open like a page no one had written on yet. When I pulled into the gravel lot of the small brick library, the air was thin and cool. Ivy curled across the roofline like it had been there longer than time. I stepped inside. Same creaky door. Same faint smell of paper and lemon oil. Ethan had written his first high school research paper here. I remembered the day clearly, rain sliding down the windows, him tapping his pencil nervously trying to write about resilience without sounding cliché. I want it to matter, he had said. But I don't want it to sound like I'm trying too hard. You don't have to be loud, I'd told him. Just honest. He quoted that in the final paragraph. Now I stood in that same library, holding the book I had meant to give him on his 18th birthday, Structures or Why Things Don't Fall Down. I had annotated the margins back then when he was considering architecture. A quiet encouragement he never knew I planned. I placed the book on the donation table. Inside, I had underlined one line. What matters most in construction is not what you see, it's what you trust to hold the weight. That evening, I returned to my apartment, shoes off, lights low. And then I saw it, the blinking red light on my landline phone. One message. I pressed play. Valerie Elliot's voice said warm, but low. I know you won't call back, but I wanted you to know. It landed. I watched the way Ethan looked at you. I saw the shift. The room changed. You didn't take the mic. You didn't need to. The truth walked in, and the story corrected itself. I stayed still for a moment, the phone warm in my palm. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. A long exhale. Not of relief, but release. I hadn't needed Samantha's apology, or Michael's shame. I had something better. Proof. Proof that I didn't need to be photographed. Didn't need to speak. Didn't need a corsage or a spotlight or a title. Because I was already in the blueprints. The part they built everything on. The part they tried to cover with flowers and speeches and new dresses. But foundations don't disappear. They just wait. There is something peculiar about being erased. Not all at once. Not with a bang. It's more like water dripping on ink, slow, quiet, until the story you lived becomes too smudged for anyone else to read. But if you've lived it every draft, every deadline, every late-night brainstorm, you remember where the words used to be. And in my case, I kept the originals. That morning, I walked into my office and opened the bottom drawer of an old locking file cabinet. Inside a worn accordion folder, the seams stretched, the labels faded, but every document intact. I wasn't hoarding. I was preserving. You don't watch a man build a company on your sweat, your sketches, your capital, and then let him bury the evidence just because he prefers a cleaner version of success. You hold on, quietly, carefully, because one day someone will ask. And that day came sooner than I expected. It was 2 evenings after the wedding when Ethan showed up unannounced. I heard his car before I saw his face, same navy sedan, same engine rattle from years ago. I opened the door before he could knock. He looked older than his 28 years, like the wedding had peeled something raw open. He stood there in rolled sleeves and weary eyes, hands in his pockets, searching for the right words. I didn't know where else to go, he said. You came to the right place, I answered. Not a smile, not a welcome, just truth. He stepped inside. The house hadn't changed. Same shelves of books, same framed photos of landscapes no one had ever visited with me. He paused in the doorway like a visitor at a museum he used to love, but hadn't thought about in years. I found the internal files, he said eventually. Your name's everywhere? It used to be, I said. He nodded. Meeting notes, emails, asset lists. You weren't a contributor. You were the foundation. And yet I murmured I was the first one left off the history page. He didn't argue. He just lowered himself onto the edge of the couch, elbows on knees like the weight of knowing sat heavy across his back. I found the email, he said. The one Dad sent you. The optics one. Ah, that email. Michael had sent it 2 years before the divorce. 1 sentence long. It would be best if you stepped away from press matters moving forward. The board prefers a cleaner founder narrative. Attached a consulting bonus. A payout large enough to look generous, but exactly the amount I was owed in silent equity. I never responded. But I never deleted it. I'm sorry, Ethan said. I studied him not to judge, but to gauge sincerity. I saw no performance. Only a man unlearning his father's myth in real time. I don't need your apology, I said. I need your clarity. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. They want me to sign something. A press statement about the wedding. Says the toast was unscripted. Says the company appreciates all contributors past and present. Safe language, I said. Sterile, he corrected. What do you want to do? He sighed. I don't want to sign it, but if I don't, it'll start a war. Maybe that war has already started, I said. And maybe it's not a war. Maybe it's just history correcting itself. He was quiet a long time. Then he reached into his blazer pocket and unfolded a letter. Would you look at it? He asked. I took the paper. It was polished, empty. Words like honor and collaborator floated between corporate blur and legal padding. My name was absent. Again, it thanked no one specific. It changed nothing. This isn't acknowledgement, I said. It's an avoidance. A placeholder pretending to be resolution? He nodded. So what would you do? I met his eyes. If someone tried to erase your daughter's name from a company she built, what would you tell her to do? That stopped him. He swallowed hard, looked away. I still have everything I said after a moment. The original sketches, the investor lists, the incorporation forms, even the first pitch deck. He looked at me like he was asking permission to believe. Would you send them to me? He said softly. I think the board needs to see the whole picture. And maybe? I do too. I didn't respond right away. I walked into my study, unlocked the drawer, pulled out the folder. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just carrying the weight of being seen again after so many years pretending I didn't care. I handed it to him. I kept everything I said. Not out of spite. Out of truth. Because I knew one day someone would ask where the blueprint was. He took it gently, like it might break. Then as he rose to leave, he paused at the door. I never thanked you, he said. Not properly. You didn't have to. I want to. He hesitated again, then added almost like a confession. They always said you were nothing. But now that I know the whole story, I think you were the beam that kept the house from collapsing. He left without another word, and I stood there in the quiet, a strange calm washing through me. Not vindication, not even satisfaction, just peace. Because the truth doesn't always arrive with trumpets or applause. Sometimes it just knocks once, asks to come inside, and finally sits down in the light. Ethan's footsteps had barely faded from my porch when I sat down at my desk, opened the oldest folder on my hard drive, and clicked through the artifacts of the life I used to live. The life where my name was on every blueprint, every founding memo, every product roadmap that shaped the company, now lauded as one of the decade's quiet tech giants. They called it his vision. But I remember who stayed up through hurricanes and colic, who typed with a nursing baby on one arm and a whiteboard behind the crib. It took only minutes to assemble the file. The documents were already named, labeled, and time-stamped. Each piece was like a breadcrumb from a life I had not tried to forget, but one I had been told to hide. I attached the scanned files one by one, the early design sketches bearing both our signatures, the original investor spreadsheet that listed my name beside Michael's under founding partners, and finally the email he sent 2 years before our divorce. That one had no greeting, just a line. It would be best if you stayed out of press matters moving forward. The board prefers a clean founder narrative, then a legal memo, then a transfer. I never replied to that message. I never had to. I kept it. I sent the folder to Ethan with a short note, for your truth. Use wisely. By morning, he had written back, thank you. Meeting with Elliot today. You may hear noise soon. I did not know what he meant by noise. But 2 days later, I heard it on my walk back from the bookstore in the form of a voice message I never expected. It was Michael. Valerie, he said, his voice clipped, half formal, half cornered. I've been made aware that some documentation has been circulated regarding the early years of the company. I'd like to clarify a few things. Elliot and I never intended to diminish your role. There were simply strategic decisions that had to be made at the time. I hope you can understand that. If possible, I'd like to meet. I stared at the message on my phone, sunlight bouncing off the screen. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he had done, just a warning disguised as diplomacy. That same evening, Ethan forwarded me an internal memo sent from Elliot to the company's board. The subject line, historical clarification. In it, Elliot wrote, after reviewing company archives, I believe we need to correct public-facing narratives. Valerie, who some of you may remember, was not merely a contributor, but a foundational partner. This mischaracterization has legal and ethical implications. I recommend we issue a statement and correct the official documentation. The public may not be watching, but our integrity is. The words settled over me like slow rain. Not because I needed recognition, but because someone finally named what I had spent years swallowing. I had been invisible in the official story. Now someone with a title and a company email was rewriting the script. I knew Michael would not take this quietly. 3 days passed. Then I got the invitation. A private dinner, hosted by Michael. At the same restaurant where he once took venture capitalists to celebrate the company's first million in seed funding, a place with white tablecloths, low lighting, and waiters who knew your wine order before you sat down. I did not want to go, but I went. I wore a navy sheath dress. Simple, clean, no jewelry but my mother's watch. When I entered, he was already seated sipping something golden from a glass that never tilted too far. The table was round, no edges to rest power on. He stood. Valerie. I nodded, sat. He started politely asking about my work, about the house, even about Ethan, as if we were old friends catching up after a harmless misunderstanding. Then he dropped the act. You know this is a distraction, he said. This correction thing, it's not going to change the company's trajectory. You know that, right? I do. You've already been paid generously. You signed the release. I did, and I never disputed it. Then what is this? He asked, leaning forward, voice sharp beneath the soft jazz. You want your name in the headlines now? I looked at him, calm, unflinching. I do not want headlines. I want history to be accurate, that's all. Val, be serious. I am, I have been, for 20 years. His jaw tightened. This could damage our brand. No, I corrected. Lying damaged your brand. Telling the truth might help it. He went quiet then, stirred his drink. The waiter came, took orders neither of us cared about, and left just as quickly. After a long silence, Michael pulled out a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket. This is a draft. It's a revised statement. We're planning to release it. I'd like your input before it goes out. I unfolded it slowly. The language had shifted. No longer vague acknowledgments. It said my name. It listed my role. It framed the partnership honestly, even if it still carried a hint of PR polish. But it was there. Finally. In writing. Signed. I glanced at the bottom. Michael had signed it himself. I looked up. Thank you, I said. He shrugged. Just cleaning things up. No, I said softly. You're doing the bare minimum, but it matters. He looked at me for a long time after that. I think for a flicker of a moment, he saw me not the woman who disappeared for optics, not the consultant, not the silence that let his legend grow. Just me, Valerie, the woman who built the floor he stands on. We did not hug. We did not toast. But when I stood to leave, he did not stop me. And that too felt like history correcting itself. The rehearsal dinner wasn't extravagant, but it was deliberate, just like Ethan. He'd chosen the little Italian restaurant tucked beside a narrow road just outside town, the kind of place with red check tablecloths and garlic braided above the kitchen door. He loved it since college swore their eggplant parmesan could fix heartbreak. I arrived exactly on time. Not early enough to start whispers. Not late enough to raise eyebrows. Just enough to make sure they saw me, because being forgotten was one thing. Being erased twice would be another. Elliot met me at the door, calm as always. He held a folded seating chart in one hand, a wine-stained napkin in the other. We gave you the best seat, he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. That's generous. It's earned. He led me past the crowded tables, past Michael standing at the bar, with a woman I didn't recognize, young, polished, sipping her wine like it tasted expensive, but empty. She didn't meet my gaze. Michael didn't either. Just looked through me the way men do when they know you have something they'd prefer, stayed buried. The table was long, the kind used for holiday meals in families that pretend to still get along. I saw Ethan, first shirt sleeves rolled up, tie-loosened face, flushed from the evening's wine and attention. Elliot gestured to the chair beside him. Not across. Not down the row. Beside him. A clear message: I belonged. I sat. No one said much. But the shift was instant. Forks slowed. Glances flicked in my direction, polite but uneasy. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. The discomfort was quiet, like pressure building in a sealed room. Then Samantha entered. She wore slate gray chiffon, her hair pulled into one of those sleek, sculptural buns that whispered money. She didn't hesitate, of course she didn't. She was used to walking into rooms already tailored to her measurements. Her eyes scanned the table, caught mine, then flicked to Elliot. She smiled, too sharp to be warm. There seems to be a mistake, she said, motioning to the seat beside Ethan. The arrangement. Ethan didn't even glance up from his plate. No mistake. Her jaw twitched. Oh. She turned her attention to me. Well, that's unexpected. I smiled, unbothered. More than you know? The tension between us wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of tension women develop after years of smiling through teeth clenched so tightly they leave impressions in enamel. She took her seat without another word. But her posture told the story. Straight-backed chin lifted, every gesture calculated. She didn't plan to confront me outright. She planned to outlast me. The first course arrived: caprese salad over bitter arugula. I pushed the mozzarella gently with my fork, while others resumed conversation, their voices lighter than their eyes. Elliot poured me sparkling water without asking. Samantha sipped her wine. Michael chuckled too loud at a joke no one else heard. Then Elliot stood. He didn't raise a glass. He didn't tap his fork. He simply placed a hand on the back of his chair and began speaking with the quiet force of someone who didn't need volume to command a room. I've watched Ethan grow into the kind of man any parent would be proud of, he said. But strong structures don't rise on their own. They require something most people never see: a foundation. He paused just long enough for the room to shift again. Samantha froze, wineglass midair. Michael stared into his plate like it held answers. There's someone here tonight, Elliot continued, who is not listed in the program. She won't walk the aisle. She won't give a toast. But if you know Ethan, really know him, you've already seen her fingerprints. He looked at me. Valerie, he said, no flourish, no apology. Thank you for building the man we're here to celebrate. No applause followed. Just that slow, deliberate turning of heads, a ripple of realization, a recalibration of assumptions. One guest adjusted her glasses. Another cleared his throat. Michael didn't move. Samantha blinked twice, then looked away. Ethan said nothing. But beneath the table, his hand brushed mine just once. A silent recognition. Not for show, for truth. Dinner continued after that, but the air had changed. Conversation resumed, but thinner stretched. Samantha laughed once, too sharply. Michael refilled his own wine. After dessert biscotti and espresso in mismatched china, I stepped outside for air. The night was cool, stars sharp in the dark sky. I leaned against the railing near the lot, watching headlights come and go on the distant road. Inside, laughter pulsed against the windows, muffled and indistinct. Ethan joined me a few minutes later. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood beside me, hands deep in his pockets, breathing slowly. She didn't like that you were at the table, he said finally. She didn't have to like it. No, he said. She just had to hear it. We stood like that a while, not facing each other, but not turning away either. Then he pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. Thick, cream-colored. Sealed. This is for Sunday, he said. Open it after the vows. I took it. Are you sure I should be there? He looked at me fully for the first time all night. You're the only reason there's a Sunday at all. I didn't respond. I couldn't. He turned to go, but paused. You were never invisible, you know. I raised an eyebrow. Just inconvenient. He smiled faint. Not anymore. And then he was gone. I stood in the dark envelope warm in my hand, the stars blinking overhead like old truths resurfacing. Inside the restaurant, the lights glowed gold, and the glasses clinked, and Samantha tried quietly to recenter the spotlight. But the story had already shifted. And for once, I didn't need to be the one telling it. Sunday morning arrived like a held breath. The kind you do not realize you are holding until it catches in your chest. I woke early, not from nerves, but from the strange stillness of a moment you know will not come twice. The hotel room was quiet, with just a sliver of sunlight slipping through the curtain. I made coffee, slowly, hands steady, mind clear. No makeup artist, no assistant. Just me, a dress I had owned for years, and the envelope Ethan had given me 2 nights before. The ceremony was set in the gardens of an old estate on the edge of town, where manicured hedges lined stone pathways, and the breeze carried the scent of jasmine. Guests gathered in soft clusters, their laughter muted by anticipation. Rows of white chairs faced a wooden arch wrapped in eucalyptus. The bride's family was already seated when I arrived. No one looked surprised to see me, but no one came to greet me either. I found my seat at the back. By choice. From there, I could see everything without being seen. I watched as the groomsmen lined up, one of them nervously patting his pockets. I watched the bride's veil flutter as her father walked her down the aisle. She looked radiant. Not because of the dress, but because of how she looked at Ethan, like she trusted him with her whole story. When Ethan turned and saw her, something shifted in his expression. It was small, almost invisible to anyone else, but I saw it. The boy I had once helped raise was now entirely his own man. When the officiant welcomed everyone and invited the couple to read their vows, I held my breath again. Ethan went first. His voice was calm, measured. I wrote these on the night I knew I wanted to marry you. He began, his eyes on his bride. But the truth is, I started learning how to love because of someone who taught me long before you ever came into my life. There was a shift in the crowd, a curious pause. She taught me that love is showing up when it is hard, that real support is not loud. It does not beg for credit. It just builds quietly and lets others stand on what it created. The air felt still. A few heads turned toward the back toward me. But Ethan did not turn. I bring that love to you, he continued, because I saw it every day growing up. And now I get to offer it freely to the person I choose for life. The bride reached for his hand, eyes glassy, and nodded. He smiled at her, but the corners of his mouth carried something else, a kind of reverence that only comes when you have seen love in all its forms. After the ceremony, guests spilled into the cocktail area. Small talk returned. Laughter rose. Music played. I remained seated for a while, watching the couple take photos beneath a tree strung with fairy lights. Elliot came over quietly, holding a glass of water. You okay? He asked. I nodded. He did not have to say anything. He did not say your name, Elliot said. But he said your legacy. That was enough. I opened the envelope in my lap. Inside was a single note handwritten in Ethan's neat print. You don't need a microphone to be heard. I hope today echoed back to you in the way you deserve. Love, always, Ethan. I folded it slowly, held it to my chest, and smiled. Not everything needed to be public. Not every thank you needed an audience. Some acknowledgments were sacred because they were silent. The reception sparkled, not just from the hundreds of candles flickering in glass cylinders across the lawn, but from the illusion of perfection that floated through the air like perfume. The tent was strung with fairy lights, the tables dressed in ivory linen and lined with polished flatware that clicked gently as laughter rose between courses. The music, jazz warm and old-fashioned, swelled as the newlyweds made their entrance hand in hand to soft applause. I stood in the shadows near a small maple tree whose leaves had just begun to change, burnished red and gold, like a reminder that even beauty knows when to let go. From my spot, I could see the couple clearly, but remain outside the orbit of attention. No one looked for me, and for the first time, that didn't feel like exclusion. It felt like choice. Elliot found me again not long after I arrived. He was holding 2 glasses of Prosecco condensation slipping slowly down their stems. For tradition, he said, as he handed me one. I took it, clinked his glass gently. You built the bones of this night? He added, voice low. But bones don't make the headlines. I gave him a soft nod. They hold everything else, though. He didn't respond, but I saw it, the recognition in his eyes. Not pity, not sentimentality, just truth. And for once, that was enough. I sipped my Prosecco slowly, savoring the crisp citrus bite, watching guests drift across the lawn in clusters. A few glanced in my direction, the kind of glances that carried speculation, but no memory. I knew that look. It said, I've heard about you. I just can't place where you belong. I didn't offer them a reason to find out. Dinner passed in its usual rhythm. Toasts were made, some touching, some forgettable. The bride's sister cried through hers, her voice cracking just before the punchline. One of the groomsmen attempted a joke about Ethan's poor cooking skills and received polite laughter. I listened not because I needed to, but because I had helped build the kind of night where people felt free to speak, to celebrate, to belong. And then, when no one expected it, Ethan stood again. He didn't tap his glass. He didn't raise his voice. He just rose, holding a half-full flute of champagne, and waited for the room to notice. And they did. One by one, heads turned. Conversations quieted. Even the waitstaff paused, hands frozen mid-clearance. I already said what mattered most during the ceremony, Ethan began, but there's something I want to repeat for the people in the back. For the people who may not have heard the quiet part. He didn't look toward me, but his voice carried. There is someone here tonight who doesn't sit at the front, who didn't make the program, who didn't wear a corsage. But she made all of this possible. Not because she had to, because she chose to. Because her love never asked for credit, it just built. The silence around him thickened, as if the tent itself were holding its breath. Some people love with words, some love with applause, and then there are those who build their love like foundations, stone by stone, until someone else can stand tall in it. He lifted his glass slightly, to the quiet architects, and the homes they make without ever signing the deed. There was a beat of stillness, then applause. Soft at first, then growing. A few people turned toward me again, but I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just let the weight of his words rest where they landed. Not on my shoulders, but in the space between us where something unspoken had been acknowledged and finally returned. Elliot leaned in slightly. That was for you. I shook my head. That was for him. Because it was. For all the years I carried the weight of someone else's future, without knowing if they'd ever understand tonight, wasn't about reclaiming what was mine. It was about seeing him become whole. That was the work. That had always been the work. As the music resumed and the couple took to the dance floor for their first waltz, I quietly stepped away. Not because I felt unwelcome, but because the story no longer needed my shadow in its frame. I followed the gravel path toward the valet stand, the laughter and lights trailing behind me like the soft closing of a book. My car was already waiting. The driver, a young man with polite eyes and an open posture, held the door open. "Leaving already, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, glancing once more over my shoulder. I was never really part of the celebration. He nodded, didn't ask questions, didn't offer platitudes. Just closed the door and returned to his post. As we pulled away from the estate, I slipped my hand into my purse and touched the envelope Ethan had given me, the one I'd opened earlier that morning, just after waking, just before dressing. Inside had been a note written in his neat print. "You don't need a microphone to be heard. I hope today echoed back to you in the way you deserve. Love always, Ethan." I had folded it carefully, placed it back into my bag like something fragile. Something earned. The car curved along the dark road, and I watched the tent disappear in the rearview mirror, just a cluster of lights fading into distance. The city glittered faintly on the horizon, and somewhere between the stars and the street lamps, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not victory, not vindication. Relief. I had nothing left to prove, nothing left to reclaim. I had been part of the structure all along. Now it was time to let it stand without me. I returned to New York quietly. No announcements, no updates. The apartment felt the same, books where I left them, coffee beans in the freezer, a letter from my editor waiting on the hallway table. I exhaled slowly, letting the silence settle in my chest. Ethan's wedding had ended, but something else had opened inside me. A chapter I never planned to write, one without expectations or apologies. I was no longer a supporting character in someone else's celebration. I had lived through the storm, and now came the stillness. 2 weeks passed. I worked. I walked. I didn't speak of the ceremony to anyone. Not even to Elliot, though he called. One evening, while watching the golden light stretch across the brick buildings from my window, I finally opened the envelope Ethan had slipped into my hand. Inside was a single photo, him as a toddler curled in my lap, with his head on my chest, and a note in his handwriting. "You taught me everything that matters. I hope one day they'll say I made you proud." I pressed my fingers over the ink, then closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I felt something sturdier than tears, recognition. Not public, not broadcasted, but intimate and unshakable. That was the kind of legacy I wanted. Later that week, I received a call from the architect firm Ethan had recently joined. They had heard about me not just as a name, but as someone who had drawn the original design for the Glass Ridge Pavilion, the one used as inspiration for the wedding venue. "Ethan told us you sketched it while pregnant with him," the woman said, her voice bright. "We'd like to display it in our lobby. Would you consider donating the original?" I paused. That drawing had been hidden in a leather portfolio behind my bookshelf for decades. It was never published, never even shared. I had created it during my maternity leave, back when I thought I would one day build again. "Yes," I said finally. "But I'll bring it myself." The next morning, I walked into the firm with the portfolio under my arm. The lobby was sleek, filled with afternoon light and polished wood. People passed by without knowing who I was. That anonymity comforted me. I handed the sketch to the receptionist. "It's unsigned," I said. "Please keep it that way." She looked confused. "Are you sure?" "Yes." The signature was never the point. As I turned to leave, A man in a navy blazer stepped from one of the side offices. His face registered surprise, then something softer. "You're Valerie." "I am. I saw the plans years ago. Your proportions, your light angles, they're studied in our internal lectures." He hesitated, then said something I didn't expect. "We've all heard the story now. The speech. The bow." I tilted my head. That was never mine to claim. But it echoed. Quiet power always does. I left with no fanfare, no press, no name on a wall, just the sound of the doors closing behind me like punctuation. That evening, I returned home, placed Ethan's note in a frame, and set it on the windowsill. It caught the light just right. Later that night, I received a message from Elliot. It was a photo Ethan on his honeymoon standing beside a small chapel in Portugal, holding a plaque. The inscription read, "Designed in the spirit of quiet architects. For Valerie." There was no need to respond. The bow had been more than a gesture. It was a recognition not of victory, but of foundation, of what had been built in silence and finally seen. And with that, I closed the door on the past. Not slammed, not locked, just gently finally closed. Valerie's story is not about revenge, it's about quiet reclamation. She doesn't shout, accuse, or destroy. She simply stands still in the truth until the room corrects itself. That is one of the most powerful adult forms of revenge, being unshakably dignified while the world slowly catches up. If you believe strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers through contracts, memories, and quiet toasts. Subscribe to Revenge with Seren. Here, we don't just tell stories. We restore voices to those who built legacies in silence.